are enjoying your summer. And I think when Brian said at Build, there were a few things about OpenAI. I think that was an understatement because every session that I looked at had AI included in that. So Microsoft is all into AI now, if you would have noticed. If you'll go and check out some of their recorded sessions on Build and Ignite. Okay, does it work?
It's not.
Okay, so yeah, if you go ahead and check out some of the YouTube videos from Microsoft Ignite and Microsoft Build, you'll notice everything has an AI flavor. So if it doesn't say AI, it will say Copilot. Those are the two flavors that Microsoft is sticking with. But today's talk, it's more on Azure OpenAI, which is a service offered by Microsoft Azure Cloud Platform. Before we jump onto that, has anyone used Azure OpenAI? Have you used OpenAI? What have you used in OpenAI? ChatGPT?
Yeah.
What do you use ChatGPT for?
I have written business plan.
Business plan? Okay. Anyone else?
I use Get Copilot, a subproduct of OpenAI.
Sure. Anyone uses it for writing emails?
Yeah.
If not, you should literally give it a try. It's worth it.
It's also
Your manager will be surprised by looking at how polished your emails become all of a sudden. But jokes apart, it's a very powerful tool. OpenAI. OpenAI is not owned by Microsoft. OpenAI is an organization on its own which came up with its own models, pre-trained models. And ChatGPT was one of the applications that they launched based on that. And Microsoft bought some stake in OpenAI, giving them exclusive rights to the models from OpenAI. And that's why what Microsoft did was Microsoft took OpenAI models and hosted them on my Azure platform so that everyone who is their cloud customer can utilize that service. But the field of artificial intelligence, it's not new. I still remember in the 90s when I was in school, maybe in middle school or high school, I remember people used to talk about 21st century when every work will be done by robots. They will run on algorithms. They will literally converse with humans. It's been 30 years since then. I haven't seen robots really becoming reality in everyone's day-to-day life. But what has really worked out is in the last 2 to 3 years since ChatGPT has gained all this, AI is becoming a day-to-day part and parcel of our lives. And I wouldn't be surprised that in the near-term future we'll have AI being introduced into everything that we do in our homes. I was reading an article from Wall Street Journal. It said what we call as smart devices today, like smart refrigerators, smart washers and dryers, they are just the first iteration of it. Once AI is introduced into those devices, they will become so smart. For example, they have taken examples that they will come with pre-fitted algorithms that once you sign in with your account, they will automatically keep track of your groceries in your refrigerator and they will automatically order at your favorite grocer. Whenever you are out with, let's say, milk or eggs or whatever, it will automatically go ahead and place orders for you and it will text you that it has already done that for you. So which is kind of very cool. I still see that few years before it really happens. But I was talking about 90s when I heard of robots, but the history of artificial intelligence goes way beyond that. It started way back in 1950s and 60s. Alan Turing, heard of Alan Turing? Who was Alan Turing? So he actually was one of the first guys who passed the notion of thinking machines, who came up with the idea that machines can think and part with human beings. And in 1955, there was another gentleman known as Professor John McCarthy. He used to work at Stanford University, and he actually defined artificial intelligence as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. So if you think about it, back in 1950s, 1955, when computers was still a new thing, people were thinking of making machines which were intelligent. So at that time, the focus was more on symbolic AI, which means symbolic representation of knowledge and then making decisions on that. But as time progressed, it transformed into what is known as machine learning. So what happens in machine learning is people started using some symbolic algorithms and started training their data model so that they can make decisions based out of the underlying models and come to conclusions. Then it further extended into what was known as deep learning, which was one kind of a machine learning, which introduced concepts of neural networks, which took machine learning to one next level. And now what we have seen, the latest iteration is the generative AI, where what we try to do is we utilize pre-trained models. So it was difficult for me to understand and figure out what's the difference between generative AI and machine learning. So anyone has experience in machine learning before? So if not, this is how I understood. One of the primary differences between machine learning and generative AI that I have found is in machine learning, you build the data model, you train your data model, and you train your machine learning models, then you can make any decision. And training those models used to take lots of time, if not months, it used to take weeks. But with generative AI, that training aspect of it is taken care of by the model provider. So in case of Azure OpenAI, that's been already done by OpenAI. So it's more of a model as a service. So we can start directly consuming some of these pre-trained models on the fly rather than worrying about training some of these models. So which is kind of a paradigm shift, but it really simplifies the consumption of artificial intelligence in our day-to-day application. It will pick up any newspaper of your choice. It would be I would be very surprised that if you don't have one or the other headline about how artificial intelligence is making impact on day-to-day life. So I have my interest slide at the very end, but I do run Omaha Azure user group. If you haven't checked it out, you check it out. I had a speaker who came and spoke on generative AI, and one of the use cases, one of the examples he took to highlight the impact it is making on day-to-day life was about a mother and a child back in India. The child was suffering from some disease, and the parents have taken the kid to almost 15 or 17 doctors, and they were not able to diagnose what was the problem. Finally, the mother gave up and thought to try ChatGPT. The mother went ahead and described everything she could understood of her kid's condition, and ChatGPT took that and provided its own diagnosis within, I think, a minute or so. The mother took it and went to one of her family doctors, and bingo, that was it. The doctors were surprised, and I'm not trying to say here that we should close all the hospitals. We should just rely on ChatGPT, but what I'm trying to say is how effective it has become, but still we should take it with a grain of salt because it can still be wrong at times because it still is building its own intelligence with every new version. But that being said, I was so amazed to learn about that story. And if you go ahead and even ping ChatGPT in the chat bar and ask about some of these use cases, it will list you so many different examples where ChatGPT has made impact. Anyways, so far I have been mixing and talking about OpenAI, sometimes Azure. So one of the questions everyone that I talk to about Azure OpenAI is when OpenAI offers its own service. They have a free service and they have a paid service that you can utilize. Why should I go ahead and use Azure OpenAI and not directly consume OpenAI? Any ideas? Yes. thoughts.
By using Azure OpenAI, we can incorporate in our applications.
You can incorporate OpenAI as well because it's all API based. Once you provision an OpenAI instance, they expose an API endpoint that you can use in your service.
It has the most recent training model. You have the
So here's the thing, OpenAI, since OpenAI owns the models, they release first and then Microsoft bring it in Azure OpenAI. So that's also not the case.
If you enable it, Microsoft can get access to your SharePoint, Outlook, all of your organizational files.
That's one of the aspects because if you are already a Microsoft customer, going through Azure OpenAI gives you access to OpenAI within Microsoft ecosystem as well. But on top of it, what happens is OpenAI is not a cloud platform, so they don't have virtually unlimited capacity that they can provision for their customers. And the speed at the pace at which it is growing, it's very difficult for them to keep growing. Going through Azure route, the advantage is since it has virtually unlimited capacity under the hood, you can keep expecting that you will never fall short of provisioning your OpenAI instances. And moreover, since it's part of Azure Cloud Platform, it also comes with all the security and governance features which are applicable for the rest of the Azure services as well. And if you are an Azure customer as well, it also offers seamless integration between Azure OpenAI and some of the other services. But when it's, sorry.
Aren't they all running into GPU restrictions? Because you can only make so many. They're just having trouble keeping up with.
That's what I was saying, they are virtually unlimited. I mean, it's a myth when this is how it is perceived when we talk about any cloud platform that they have unlimited capacity. But that's not really true because they have physical infrastructure which has limitations. They have been adding capacity to it on a daily basis, but still they have limitations to it. NVIDIA cannot provide them enough chips. What can Microsoft do? So they started building their own chips, but still their demand is more than supply. But the idea is if you compare Microsoft with OpenAI, Microsoft is well placed to keep bringing the capacity into Azure platform compared to what OpenAI can.
So Microsoft's building their chips.
Microsoft is building on their own chips as well. They announced last year at Ignite. So anyone attended Build keynote this time? So one of the interesting announcement they made was before Build, any new model version that OpenAI was releasing, it was not readily available in Azure OpenAI. It used to take at least a couple of weeks for that model to show up in Azure. But starting with GPT-4, which is GPT-4 only, the most recent model version, it was available the same day OpenAI has released. It was available the same day in Azure OpenAI as well. So they have kind of merged their release cycles of their models along with what OpenAI is doing. So what we can do with Azure OpenAI, basically there are 4 distinct use cases. You can do content generation. Most simplistic I've seen is when I have to draft emails, when I have to draft documents. In fact, I was playing around with PowerPoint earlier this week. I asked Azure OpenAI if it can create a PowerPoint for me on Azure OpenAI. So it was not as good as I would have expected it to be, but it did not do that job. It was decent enough, I would say. If my daughter, who is 6th grader, if she has to do it, it would be at that pace, at that level. But it was still not bad. They were trying to include some of those things. And another thing was, when I'll show you in a demonstration, but how this works is you interact with the models in a chat-based environment. And as you chat with the model, you can keep building your context. It maintains the history. So what happened was I asked it to create an OpenAI PowerPoint presentation for 60 minutes for .NET developers. it came up with 15 or 16 slides, but it was plain white and most of it was content. I went back and asked that, hey, this is very, very simplistic. I want it to be more colorful and I want more graphics and I want less of data. And Bingo, it went ahead and it made those modifications and returned. But again, still it was not up to the mark. I think it's improving. But that simplifies lots of things. At least I don't have to start with scratch. I can get some boilerplate thing up front and then I can work on that. But that content generation is first use case where you can use Azure OpenAI, and it could have any use case. For example, I have worked with customers who have been using Azure OpenAI for their call center folks who needs to generate their information out of knowledge bases, which is great. Summarization. How many of you read books? Do you like reading books? Okay, that's the only ones who did not raise hands. You can really try summarization. So it's amazing functionality. You can throw a 500 pages document to it and ask it to summarize what's the essence of it, and it will do it for you. And it just not summarizes the essence of it, it also comes back with references to the specific pages that it picks up the points from. So which is very cool. I think it simplifies so many things. Since Azure OpenAI is now integrated with Azure ecosystem, I have already reached out to one of the teams, Microsoft Teams product manager, that why the heck they don't go ahead and include this summarization feature in the Teams chat. How many of you use Teams? So they did introduce Microsoft 365 Copilot, which apparently should work with Teams, but one of the most frustrating aspects of Teams is if I'm in meetings in a day, by the time I go back to Teams chats, there are thousands of messages across hundreds of different chats that I have to go through, and it's a mess for me sometimes. So I have to skip through some of those conversations, and there is very high probability of missing out on messages. So I really wish that Microsoft leverages Azure OpenAI and goes ahead and introduces a plugin where I can go ahead and just say, hey, just summarize me the essence of all the last 100 messages, and it gives me the summary of that. I would love that, but I hope it happens well.
If they give you a summary for the day, like all your meetings, that can help.
There is something like that in Microsoft 365 Copilot. So where it summarizes, I was seeing a demo, but I've never tried it personally because I use Mac and I have not really used Microsoft Office on Windows yet. That is something you should try on Microsoft Copilot, and maybe let me know how you feel it, if it does the job or not. But apparently Microsoft 365 Copilot is supposedly going to make that easy. And that's why I'm saying I'm not seeing it on Teams yet on Mac, but I will see how it goes. So far,
I got Teams pulled up right now. I have the Copilot add-in, and I can ask it for, I'm up to date.
does it summarize it?
I can do highlights from the last day, yeah. So I don't know if it's an organizational.
Yeah, maybe for my organization, Copilot is not enabled yet.
Yeah, I know, we're going, pretty hard on AI type stuff right now, so.
Yeah, one of the challenges I've seen with adoption of things like Copilot and organizations is the security. They just don't know where the data it is capturing. I understand it's the same fear that I have when I have to use Alexa or Google Home, because I always have a fear that they are listening to me on my conversations. So, but again, my wife says my iPhone is also listening to me because Siri is on all the time. So, but that's just me, and I can relate to my organization say that they have fear about all the AI technology because they don't know who is listening to them and where the data is going to reside. But being developers, one of the major use cases of this technology is code generation. How many of you have used GitHub Copilot? The rest of the other folks, well, what have you been doing? ChatGPT. Yeah, do you use ChatGPT?
A little bit, very specific, things that could be open about, remove all of this stuff, Nancy text manipulation. But there's they haven't really decided. They've got, some people are really for and against. It's all political policies.
I think it's a great tool. Like I was helping some time back an engineer who was struggling with Terraform code, and I went to ChatGPT on my phone. I asked it, hey, this is what we are trying to do. This is what I need. Can you give me a Terraform script that I can refer to? And it gave me a Terraform script. I went to the other script that my engineer was working on, and I compared with it, and I knew exactly what wrong this fellow was doing, and then pointed it to him and fixed it, and it ran, and bingo. But again, when you're using tools like ChatGPT or OpenAI code generation, just take it with a grain of salt because you cannot really trust it. But that being said, it's really good. You don't have to write code from scratch, and it is actually very good. And I was teaching it to my daughter the other day, who is just trying to learn how HTML works and how she can start making her own websites and mobile apps. And I said you can take reference from ChatGPT, but just don't use copy paste and build applications like that. I want you to write the code and learn how it works. But it's pretty good, pretty neat. Lastly, you can also utilize it for semantic search, where you can search for, you can have use cases where you want to search for product reviews, you have to search for products in your inventory and your catalog. Pretty decent, you can utilize it. Then it's not like you can only use one model that's exposed by OpenAI. You can have multi-model use cases as well. I'll go ahead into Azure portal and show you how to get started, but this is a QR code if you are interested in how to get started with creating an Azure OpenAI instance from scratch in Azure portal. Please scan this QR code, it will give you step-by-step instruction on what you need, what are the prerequisites, and how you can get started with your own Azure OpenAI instance. And it's a lab from Microsoft, so it's always up to date, so that if there is any changes in OpenAI instances, so it will always be up to date. Who all have worked in Azure platform or has been working on Azure platform? Have you used Azure Cognitive Services? So Azure AI Services is not a new thing. It's a new terminology that they use as an umbrella offering for all of their Azure AI services. But it started way back, I think, 4 or 5 years ago when Microsoft came up with Azure Cognitive Services, through which you can do things like face recognition, form recognition, OCR capabilities, image processing, and stuff like that. And then when Microsoft took stake in OpenAI and introduced Azure OpenAI, that's when they started rebranding their Azure AI offering, and they came up with this Azure AI services as the main offering under which they have brought in all their different offerings. So if you ever get confused, there is no specific service called Azure AI, but Azure AI is a combination of all the different Azure AI services which are offered by Microsoft Azure platform. And as you will see, Azure OpenAI sits in between there on the customizable AI models, but there are lots of other services that you can still consume. Most of them are API based, so you can make REST-based API calls and consume that. Before we start looking into how we can start consuming Azure OpenAI service as a developer, Microsoft, one of the advantages you get by running Azure OpenAI and not OpenAI standalone is Microsoft has this known as responsible AI paradigm or principles, in which they have clearly defined that any AI service that they expose should align with these top AI principles, which is more focused on ethical nature of it, as well as security, reliability, and all different factors. So, apart from those principles, what Microsoft also focuses on is any AI service should align with these principles, but they should also have a set of governance constructs. They should have policies in place. They should have supporting tools as well, so that these can be consumed by the developers, and that's what Microsoft make it possible to their offering. So, what is a prompt? Anyone who has used ChatGPT, do you know what is the prompt?
Isn't it what you're putting in?
It's exactly what you are putting it into ChatGPT's text box and press enter. That's how you converse with the model. So when you are interacting with the models, one of the key area to focus on is your prompt. There is actually a separate field, or there could be a 1-hour session on prompt engineering, on how good you should engineer your prompts, because depending upon how good your prompts are, the response from the model can be good or bad, depending purely on your prompts. So for example, what you are seeing here on the screens are some of the very basic examples of prompts that you can pass into Azure OpenAI. If you don't have Azure OpenAI Service, you can literally try this with ChatGPT as well, so it should be all right. You will get more or less similar responses because both are using the same models. But for example, if I go ahead and ask, write a tagline for an ice cream shop, it's a very incomplete prompt. The reason why I say so is because it just says there is an ice cream shop for which I need a tagline. It doesn't give any more information. It doesn't say which city it is in. It doesn't say what product it is offering, and so on. So based on that limited prompt, what it says is it comes up with a tagline saying, "We serve up smiles with every scoop," which is not bad. This is not bad by any means, but still, I have another slide where I'll show if we could provide a little bit of more metadata to it in our prompt, the response can be way better. How many of you have used ChatGPT to fix your IT issues at home? If you haven't tried out, it's worth it. Any of the IT issues or any issues that you see at home, your HVAC stops working, your Wi-Fi stops working, your internet is not working. So I was installing fans in my kids' rooms, and I could not know because the boxes that I had was 3.5 inches, and the ones that fan needs is 4 inches, and I didn't know that. And I simply went to ChatGPT and I clicked a picture of it, and I said, "Hey, will this work for having a fan?" It said no, because this is 3.5 inch. You should get a 4-inch box from Home Depot, and they quickly came back with links from Home Depot and parts that I can go ahead and place order. So it saves so much of time for me. So, for example, one of the examples I have taken here is I'm having troubles getting my Xbox to turn on, and it comes back saying there are a few things you can try to troubleshoot this issue, and it lists some of the things that you can try. And I've heard of so many examples from people, like the other speaker who spoke at my user group. He said once his Wi-Fi stopped working, and he went ahead and he put it in ChatGPT, describing this is what he is seeing. And ChatGPT came back with steps, and he went ahead and performed those steps, and it started working. And what you are seeing there is, on the center, if you will notice, this is how we maintain context in our conversations. So the very first thing I asked is, I'm having troubles with Xbox getting on. It gives me steps that I can go ahead and fix my Xbox. Then on top of that, I went ahead and asked, "Thanks that bug, what games do you recommend for my 14-year-old?" I did not say I'm looking for Xbox specific games. It could have assumed that it is Sony, PlayStation games or anything, but because I've asked about Xbox, it maintains that context that I'm asking for Xbox related games, and it gives me some of the recommendations. Next, what you are seeing is you can also utilize this for generating your own code. Remember, we are talking about code generation. So this is a very simple example where we have asked it to give us a query for all the customers in Texas named Jane, and it creates a query for us. But this is a very simple example. I have created a full-blown website using ChatGPT. I went ahead and said, I'm a dealer who has a car dealership. I want to create my own website. Can you give me a code for that? And went ahead and did that. And the other speaker in my user group, he went ahead, he did demonstrate it in this session as well. He went ahead and asked ChatGPT to create a website for his insurance underwriting firm with a login feature as well, and it did create the code. He downloaded the zip file and it worked locally. Again, it was not 100% as is that he can put it on hosting platform and run it, but it was way better than starting from scratch. Another thing you can do is image processing. How many of you have your own business or podcast or blogs or whatever for which you need a logo or something of that sort? Try ChatGPT to generate your logos. It's very amazing. I have still not figured out if it is all royalty free or not. I have assumed it's all royalty free. But what you will see is similar to what I'm showing here, a ball of fire with vibrant colors to show the speed of innovation at our media and entertainment company. By giving that just prompt, it returns back that logo. So,
Are you using ChatGPT with the internet functionality turned on, getting better results than without? And are you seeing better responses like this from 3.5 versus 4 or whatever?
4 gives better results, in my opinion, and then faster results as well. That's what I have observed. I mean, it's very subjective. I don't have objective numbers because I don't use it at an enterprise scale where I can come back with specific numbers, how much performance 4 gives a boost for. But overall, I think GPT-4 and 4.0 is way better in speed and the results that it brings. So,
With internet functionality turned on, you find that?
I've been using it with default features.
Okay.
I've not done anything on or whatever it's there. So when you talk about Azure OpenAI, there are 4 distinct models that you should be aware of that you can consume in your applications. GPT-4, GPT-3.5, Embeddings, and DALL-E. Starting from the very bottom, DALL-E is your image generation model, so if you need to generate any images or logos, you can use DALL-E. Embeddings is when you want to generate vector-based output or responses for your prompts. GPT 3.5 was the first pre-trained model that OpenAI released, and it was for natural language and code generation features. Before that, when GPT-3 was there used to be a different model known as Codex, on which GitHub Copilot is based on, through which you can generate code. But starting with GPT 3.5, it came with code generation capabilities as well. So the Codex model was dropped, and GPT-4 is their newest, most capable model, and now GPT-4.0, which is in preview. And with every new version, they have been improving the performance, and the state of the responses is also way better. So yeah, this was what I got, that OpenAI killed Codex code model and recommends GPT 3.5 instead. So if you have, by any chance, if you're consuming Codex model in any of your applications, switch to GPT 3.5. So before we jump onto that, let me quickly jump onto Azure Portal and show you how you can get started. So what you see here is Azure Portal. How many of you are seeing Azure Portal for the first time? Just everyone who used the Azure Portal in the past. So what you can do is, once you have access to an Azure subscription in Azure Portal, you can log in into Azure Portal and go inside your Azure subscription. And you can then create an Azure OpenAI instance. You can go there and do it, or you can also search for Azure OpenAI from here. So if you go in Azure OpenAI, you can go ahead and click on Create. It will ask you for the resource group in which you can provision your Azure OpenAI instance, the region in which it should go to, be cognizant of the regions, because as of now, whenever there is a new model which is being released, it's not available in all the regions right away. So if there is a specific model that you would like to consume in your application, please check Microsoft documentation and what regions that model is available so that you can create your OpenAI instance in that specific region. Otherwise, you will not be able to utilize that particular model. Right now, they only offer one single SKU, which is as standard as 0. I assume going forward, they will add many more versions of it, but for now, that's the only one that's available here. And you can give a name here. And once you will go ahead and click next, provide any tags if you or your organization needs, and click on create. It hardly takes a minute or two to provision it. I already had created a few OpenAI instances. The one that I've created for this particular presentation was OI, which is short form for OpenAI, and Omaha MTG. So this is what you will see once your OpenAI instance is provisioned. You can't do really much here. What you need to do is go into Azure OpenAI Studio, which is shown here, or you can also go in here on the bottom here and go into the Azure OpenAI Studio. So once you will go into that, it will land up into dashboard where you will get access to the different playgrounds through which you can play with different models. But before you can play and test any of the models, you first have to deploy the models that you want to test with. For that, you have to go down here. Do you see deployments there? If you'll go and click on deployments, you can go in and click on create new deployments. And there you will see all the supported models. Now this list will vary depending upon which region you have created your Azure OpenAI instance in. Remember I was saying be aware of the region in which your model is available. So if one of my friend was working on Azure OpenAI and he wanted to use a specific model, but he created it in a different region and he couldn't see the model in this drop down, and he pinged me. I was also not sure why it was not showing up here, and finally we figured out that it was the OpenAI instance was created in a wrong region. So before you provision your OpenAI instance, please check the regions in which your model is available and then create that so that it comes here in drop down. And you can go ahead and choose whichever model you want to utilize. Let's say if I want GPT-4 Turbo, I can either select it to be auto-updated because OpenAI keeps releasing new versions, and they name the versioning scheme is to weird in my opinion. So for example, looking at that, what will you make out of it, which is the most recent version? I mean, I always see that I always believe that 0125 should be the older version, then it should be 0613, and then it should be 1106. But that's not the case. 0125 is the most recent, and I think 0301 is the most recent because that's from March. So what happens is they have taken the month and the date when it was released. So 0125 is January 25, 0613 is June 13, and 1106 is November 6th, and 0301 is March 1st. And it was so confusing to us because they said use the latest version, and we were like, which is the latest version? Oh, it gives the information. Where here? Control model updates to. It doesn't say anything about how that versioning scheme works. And I did create a Microsoft support ticket as well, and they said this is a versioning scheme from OpenAI, so check with OpenAI. That's when we checked with OpenAI, they said this is how they version these. So that was one of the lyrics. So before we start using, be aware of that how weird their versioning scheme is. And I did ask them what happens if you next year go back and release another model version on 0125. Then you will have two model versions with the same model version number. But they did not answer. You're not going to release on the same day. I said, so you can only have 365 versions.
Tomorrow.
But this was weird. But anyways, you go ahead and provide the name for your deployment. One thing you should be aware of is token limit that you are planning to provision for your model, because at the end of the day, when you are sending your prompts to your model, what it calculates is how many tokens you are sending to in your prompt and how many tokens it's returning in the response, and based on that Microsoft will charge you. And it doesn't give you an unlimited TPM limit, which is token per minute. So there is a limit for each of the model type in each region. So be cognizant of that fact and choose wisely, because Microsoft is not your friend. You are their customer, and they will charge you based on how many tokens you are sending. But since what I'm showing you is pay as you go model, so till the time you don't send prompts, you should be good there. But if you have applications which are sending prompts to your OpenAI models, be aware of what TPM limits you are sending there, because if you set it too low, it will result in the performance latency in your response models, and if you set it too high, it will impact your costs. And nevertheless, once you go ahead and provide those details and click create, it will create a deployment like this. So what I did was I created a model deployment for the most recent model that was announced last month, GPT-4 and I can go ahead into my playgrounds here on dashboards, and let's say if I pick up the chat one, it pops up a playground where I can go. It gives me a chat-based interface where I can play with my model. On the left side, what you are seeing here is how I can configure my chat bot. So by default, it uses a default template, but I can set a different template. For example, I can have my model believe that it's a Microsoft support person, and I'm coming as a Microsoft customer, so it will start replying in that context. I can have him set as an IRS consultant, and I can start asking finance-based questions. And I think there's a template for IRS as well. So if I go and choose here, do you see one for IRS?
Very top.
Yeah, IRS fix that bot. So if I go and select that, then I can go ahead and start asking finance-related questions, and that's for the data that it works on. So try that out. It's pretty cool, but if you choose a wrong template, it might not answer you the questions that in the way that you are expecting it to be.
Is that a politician?
Well, it's difficult to have a politician-based chatbot because they are very dynamic. Well, but what you can do here is you can go here and start conversing here. So anyone has any questions, we can start. It could be anything that you want to ask out of curiosity.
Is one of the biggest concerns of security for like, if you give it a sample of code and ask for a summary, then it will hold on to that code and use it down the road.
That's very true. It is one of those. That's why they are not opening it up for developers, because they just don't know where that code is getting pasted to with that server. But it's a very good feature if you ask me. Like I have seen people who, let's say there is a class file which has thousands of lines of code. It's practically impossible for a person to go and go through it within 5 minutes and understand what that piece of code is doing. But you can simply copy that code and paste it there and ask it, hey, can you tell me what this piece of code is doing? It will do its magic and come back within a minute saying, hey, this is what this is doing. There's these many methods, this method does this method does that. But let's go and say, how is the
If you use GitHub Copilot, it will tell directly in your IDE.
I'm sorry?
If you use GitHub Copilot in your IDE, it will tell the same thing.
One thing it doesn't like
give you
me.
suggestions. You can chat
It
with
doesn't like me, it wants me to use a weather app, but you come up with any questions, it's very friendly, it will certainly like one of you and answer questions.
Not a question for the prompt, but where do you go from here, right? So is your only way to access this through this studio, or can you then?
So this is just an interface that you can play with the models to see how it works, what kinds of prompts you can test with. But what essentially happens is you go ahead and deploy your models. What I've shown you in Azure portal, you can essentially do it with any of the ISC tools. You can utilize Azure CLI to do the same thing, to provision whichever model you would like to. Once you have the model provision, then you can essentially go ahead and integrate your API, your models in OpenAI instance into your applications. Then it is as simple as calling those API endpoints. And I have tried it in .NET in two ways. You can either use .NET SDK for Azure OpenAI, and that's what I'm showing here, where you can pass the prompt and it will return. That's the endpoint you have to pass. And you can also use an HTTP client object, and you can make a REST call to the endpoint and pass the request object and it will return you the response. So essentially what you are seeing on the Azure portal, if I go into developer portal, and so if you go here, and go to the developer tools, you can traverse all the network traffic happening. It essentially ended up with, this is just an interface Microsoft built for us so that we can test it. But under the hood, it is simply calling all the OpenAI APIs, and that's what we can do in our code directly. So there are two ways to do it, as I said. You can use an Azure OpenAI as the SDK as well. That's available for .NET and Python and other languages. Or you can also use the HTTP clients that's available in the plain SDK clients. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Because that's how you are going to consume in your applications, and you are right. This is just for if I need something from ChatGPT, or I can go and use this interface, but how the hell I go ahead and utilizing my applications?
My question is if you could integrate that, your prompt here with an existing tool like
You can.
Copilot plugin or.
Yeah, you can. So you see an option here.
From scratch.
You see an option there, deploy to a new web app. So you can actually take this chatbot interface and deploy it into your web application and publish it to your use of customers so that they will get this chat interface and they will start. That's another way. If that was what you asked.
So if I use that feature, it's going to be on my subscription.
It's going to be your subscription. As I said, Microsoft is not your friend. You are their customer. So don't leave running things if you don't use them, and if you are using them, they will charge you. But what you are seeing here is a basic example of passing an input and getting a response for the completions here, API endpoint. So it's important to understand three different use cases where you can integrate these models with your application. One is completion, embeddings, and chat completion. So completion takes an input prompt and generates one or more predicted completions, which is very similar to chat completion because it also takes the input and returns the response, but it takes in the form of chat. The third one is embedding, where it takes input and returns back the vector representation of your input. Just a word of caution here, GPT-3 and GPT-3.5, GPT-3 and GPT-3.5 supports completion, but starting GPT-3.5 Turbo models, it only supports chat completion. So what that means is, whichever job you are trying to do, you have to be aware of which endpoint you are calling to. So if you are calling completions endpoint, what you are seeing on the top, with GPT-4 it won't work because GPT-4 does not support completion. For that you have to use chat completions endpoint, so which includes chat in the endpoint. This is what you can do it for embeddings, where you can see the input and the output. It essentially converts it into a vector representation for the prompt that you have provided. And it's very simple when you are making these calls from your application code. It basically needs three things. One is the endpoint, one is your API key, which you can get it from here if you go to Azure portal here. You see key and endpoint. These are the two things. Key, you can use either of those keys, key 1 or key 2. You can regenerate them if you think those are compromised. And you can use that endpoint there. Those are the two things that you need from here. And the third thing that you need is your deployment name that you can get it from Azure OpenAI Studio, which will be in deployment, which will be this. So those are the three things that you need when you are consuming Azure OpenAI SDK or SDK client to make calls to the API from your code. So that's the vector embedding representation, and this is the chat completions thing. You will see the difference between the completions and chat completions. And what you will notice here is the more information that you pass to your chat completion endpoint, the better the response will be. And one of the distinctions between chat completion and completion is chat completion also maintains the context and the history of your conversation with the model. That's the example I was showing you, mentioning about that how you can utilize Azure OpenAI SDK. So the code that you're seeing here is .NET-based code where you can initialize your OpenAI client instance and then you can make calls to whichever model you are looking for. And it's a basic API call that you can make in your code. You can do the same thing using OpenAI SDK for Python if you are a Python developer. And then this is a Microsoft provided lab. If you are interested in consuming any of the Azure OpenAI model in your application, it gives example in both C# and Python. If you are interested in doing that lab, it gives you step-by-step prerequisites and these steps as well, which you can try. There are different use cases where you can utilize Azure OpenAI. Some of the examples that I've taken is one of them is document process automation. What I'm trying to show here is, let's say if you have a process where you want to automate your documentation, you can utilize several Azure services like Azure Function, Azure Form Recognizers, and then feed that information into Azure OpenAI, and then get the information displayed to the customer to run their application. It could be another use case, could be if you are implementing an AI-powered Q&A over your enterprise data sources. And one of the things that often comes up is how Azure OpenAI supports models to be offered by OpenAI. But what if we want to bring our own data? What if we want to bring our own enterprise data out of RAG? Anyone knows what is RAG? Response augmented generation. So what it does is it, instead of just building the responses based on the pre-trained model that OpenAI offers, it also takes the input of the documents that you want provided to the model, then it will run. It will augment on top of it and then combine more information from the pre-trained model from OpenAI and then return the response. If you haven't read about it, read about it. RAG is the most popular design pattern that's being used today for any of the Gen AI technologies. It's not specific to Azure OpenAI or OpenAI, it's being used with Gemini and other things as well. So this was what I was talking about. Remember, I was saying about prompt engineering and how important it is to build your prompt when you are working with any of the Azure OpenAI services. It's very important to provide meta context as well, plus your prompt. So if I provide additional meta context to it, like provide, for example, if I look up my product inventory to it, as well as I provide things like the location of my ice cream parlor and so on, and then ask it to generate a tagline, the response changes. Now it says scoops of heaven in the herd of Phoenix. Remember earlier it was something like smiles with the scoops or something. Now it says scoops of heaven in this herd of Phoenix. So based on how you build that meta context and how you build your prompts, the responses will improvise based on that. So when you are building your prompts, there are a few key terms that you should be aware of. So whatever, as you were saying, whatever you go ahead and put it in the chat bot, inside the text box is your prompt. But then within the prompt, what it looks for is it returns back a response, which is known as completion. It returns a completion response. And then what you see is different tokens inside your prompts, which are being processed by the model to return the completion response. I've already shown you this when you go to Azure OpenAI, it gives you different playgrounds. I did show you the chat playground, but you can also play with completions playground. There is another playground for Delay where you can play with images and try out different models. That could, as I was saying, that could be a separate session, 1 hour session for prompt engineering, but essentially what prompt engineering refers to, it's to utilize different techniques so that you can design a prompt in such a way that it improves the relevancy of your responses from the model and the accuracy of the completions. It improves the styling and the formatting. It provides conversational context, and it mitigates any biases and improves fairness. For example, there are things that you can do using prompt engineering. When you are building your prompts, you can also provide system prompts to train the system so that it understands the context. Remember, we were looking at the IRS chatbot, so that was kind of system prompt we were processing, providing it so that it understands the context in which it should be responding as well. Provide clear instructions. So what you are seeing on the 2 examples, on the left side we are just asking for a description for a new water bottle, and on the right side we are asking for a description for a new water bottle that is 100% recycled. Be sure to include that it comes in natural colors with no dyes, and each purchase removes 10 pounds of plastics from our oceans. So depending upon what you ask, how you build your prompts, how specific you are, what you are looking from the model, if you read through both the responses, you will identify the differences and how good the response is in the second case compared to the first one. This is exactly relates to what we were saying for the ice cream example. There are some separate sections, as I was saying, you can break your prompts as you will start building your applications. You can have primary prompts, you can have secondary content, you can have grounding content. You can give cues to the system in your prompt so that it understands exactly where you are headed to or what you are trying to ask. There are very small things which can make difference in your responses. For example, you can be, if you are trying to get code from or responses related to your SQL queries, things help, like if you provide the information on what kind of formatting you are looking for. In this example, if you will say that the user says that he needs responses in markdown format, so the model returns that. If you go back and ask to return it in JSON, it would have written it in JSON. So the more specific you could be what you are looking for in the output format as well, that can also change the response that you are getting. We did touch upon conversation history, but again, it's very important to maintain that conversation context and through your history as you keep passing prompts one by one. Models will keep building the context, so it's very important to maintain that conversation history so that with every completion response, the quality of the response improves. There is another lab for prompt engineering. I thought to put it there if you are too interested. It is very interesting lab that I tried. If you will be interested, please go ahead and check that lab. Very interesting, but you will only be able to do it once you do the previous 2 labs. There are some of the examples I've tried to take here, that what happens when you pass the prompts and what happens. So in the top box is what a customer conversation is. Customer has provided all the information about a car accident. Then the Azure OpenAI instructions is the instructions that the customer is passing to the model, that what exactly the customer needs in the response, and the output is what is highlighted in green. And it's just not specific to English, it is multilingual. So if you're not an English native speaker, you can use multiple languages. And a fun story, models get easily based on how the languages and based on how you ask these prompts. So again, going back to the speaker who was presenting at my user group, he gave me a very interesting example. He was saying he went to ChatGPT and asked in English about instructions, I think, on how to rob a bank. And it did come back saying, no, this is illegal and I cannot support and answer you this. So the gentleman went back and drafted something in a different language. I think it was one of the Indian languages. And it drafted a prompt in such a way that it confused the model, and the model came back actually in that particular language, whole instructions on how someone can rob a bank and still not get caught. So the point there was, this is still not perfect, it is keep on going because it works in English model in a way, it doesn't mean that it cannot hallucinate in other languages. So there are ways, don't literally go and try hacking these models, but what I'm trying to say is take it with a grain of salt. It is still developing, so there are chances that you might get wrong information. So please use it wisely. Some more examples. Karthik has presented in one of the sessions, in one of the user groups on GitHub Copilot, I remember. So it's pretty decent tool. If you haven't used GitHub Copilot, I strongly encourage you to give it a try. I see it as the next iteration of IntelliSense. So I was so happy when IntelliSense was introduced in Visual Studio. I thought that was so good. Now if you use GitHub Copilot, you will be amazed if you haven't used it in the past. How many of you have seen Azure Copilot? I guess no one.
Is it GitHub chat Copilot?
No, it's Azure Copilot. So what you will see is when you will log in into Azure portal, this was in private preview till build, but at build they made it available for all the Azure customers. So if you are logging into Azure portal, and if your global administrator has not disabled it, you will be able to see this Copilot here. If you are new to Azure or you have been using Azure but you always have to troubleshoot issues, what is going on in your Azure environment, I highly encourage you to go ahead and check Azure Copilot. You can interact with it with like any chatbot. You can pass on instructions in plain English language. You can ask things as simple as, hey, I want to provision an Azure OpenAI instance, give me steps. It will go ahead and it will give you all the instructions. You can ask it, no, I don't want to do it in Azure portal, I want to do it in CLI. It will give you those instructions. And what it also does is, if you are aware of Azure Resource Graph, it actually generates KQL queries for you so that you can grab that and keep it with you, so that in future if you have to go ahead and fetch the same queries, you can do that using custom query language. But that might be too advanced, but if you haven't checked out Azure Copilot, I highly encourage you to do so since it's available for everyone.
So can you actually tell it to do those things instead of just giving instructions?
No.
Oh.
No, it will give you all the commands as well, but it still lets you do it because it doesn't have permissions to perform. You need to have a role-based access control implemented for it, and it's too risky for Copilot to go ahead and perform any actions. For example, if you ask it to go ahead and delete a virtual machine, it's not going to do it. It will give you all the commands and all the steps that you need. And I have been working on Azure since some time now, and I have seen so many people who reach out to me with some of the questions which they could have actually literally Googled. And I feel so frustrated at times that I wasn't busy with something you could have actually Googled it, and the first response you would have got, your answer. But I'm not blaming them. I know that's how we work. And if I have any questions that I know Karthik can answer, I will just go ahead and approach him rather than doing Google. But this is pretty handy. If you'll go and give it a try, you will love it. So, have you used Microsoft Designer? Do you know what is Microsoft Designer? It's part of the Microsoft tools that they provide for UX designers, where you can design your own logos. This is a video I have stolen from Satya Nadella's keynote, because I don't know how to use Microsoft Designer. I don't have a license for it, but it was pretty cool because it uses the same delay model that's available in Azure OpenAI, and I wanted to give a context to everyone what you can do in image processing.
With just that, Designer immediately generates templates for you based on what you write, and you can get custom-made images based on your ideas. And there is no need to spend time creating a new design on your own or searching through thousands of pre-made templates. As you tell Designer what you like, the design becomes tailored for you. One more click and you have a design ready to go.
So that was just a very short clip that I got from Satya's keynote, and this is from last year's Ignite in November. So chances are there might have been more improvements to it, but what he was trying to show was how easy it is for any non-IT user as well to go to this web tool and provide information and generate logos and images based on their choice and the information that they provide. Again, the word of caution, my assumption is this is all royalty free. If it is not, then you should catch it with Microsoft or OpenAI, but my understanding is this should all be royalty free.
With just that, Designer immediately
So, few considerations when you are trying to utilize Azure OpenAI. Some few things you should answer when you start consuming it. Why do you need OpenAI? And if the answer is yes to all of these, then you should go for it. For example, if you need a general purpose model that can handle multiple tasks, for example, completions or summarization or whatnot. If you would like to generate human-like content with privacy and security, and you need to provide inputs in natural language, then you can utilize Azure OpenAI. You need rapid prototyping and quick time to market. For most of the use cases, you can utilize Azure OpenAI. You could use a model with no or little training. That's exactly the point behind any pre-trained model when we generate technology. And all the use cases we have been talking about, from day-to-day tasks of sending emails to writing your code or whatever. If you have any use case, you can utilize it for that purpose. Any one of you have used Azure AI Studio? I've shown you what you have seen there was Azure OpenAI Studio. I told you that if you are here, there is Azure OpenAI Studio, which is open here. But did anyone notice there is another term here, Open Azure AI Studio? What is that? So Microsoft couldn't do any better in confusing people, is what I believe, because first they announced Azure OpenAI, then they announced Azure OpenAI Studio, then they announced Azure AI Studio. And you can actually, whatever I was showing you in Azure OpenAI Studio, you can do it in Azure AI Studio. So what happens is I will tell you a little story. Remember the slide I was showing you, the whole Azure AI services ecosystem, which had all the cognitive services, Azure OpenAI. So the approach Microsoft has been taking was, for each of these individual services, Microsoft was building individual studios, like the Azure OpenAI Studio, and then out of the blue moon, they came up with this idea that it's not a scalable approach to build studios for every service. So they came up with a single centralized studio in which you can build all your AI services at a single place. And that's what Azure AI Studio is, where you can just not build Azure OpenAI apps. You can also go ahead and use all the rest of the Azure AI services at a single pane of glass. So don't get confused if you come across Azure AI Studio. You can essentially do the same thing that I was showing you in Azure OpenAI Studio, but it also gives you access to the rest of the Azure AI services. Money you should be aware of. It's not free. They charge you based on tokens, mostly for the completions-based models, and it's generally charged per 1,000 tokens. And depending upon how many tokens you send in each of your requests, it will keep building on that, and they will charge you. if it's DALI, if you're using DALI model for images, then it's charged for per 100 images. Now this pricing is for pay-as-you-go model. How many of you know what are reservations in any cloud platform? Any idea what is reservations? So what happens is in any cloud platform, if you can predict the capacity that you are going to consume for any of the Azure services, you can essentially go ahead and buy this capacity up front. You can reserve the capacity up front, which is known as reservation. The advantage you get out of it is Microsoft will give you steep discounts on the pricing. So for example, if a compute virtual machine costs you, let's say, $100 a month, in pay-as-you-go model, if you go and buy reservation, it might cost you under 40 or $50. So you can save substantial money, but the challenge is, if I am running a compute, I can shut it down anytime I want, and Microsoft will not charge me, but once I commit to a reservation, it's a monthly reservation, and I have to pay no matter what if I use that capacity or not, because it's dedicated to me. So the same thing is applicable for Azure OpenAI as well, but it's slightly different from most of the other Azure reservations you might be aware of. It is known as provision throughput. So if I go back to here and go to this, do you see quotas there? So you see here standard and provision. So standard is what is pay as you go, but once you are running your enterprise applications using Azure OpenAI and you need more predictable capacity, then you might like to consider provision. But trust me, it's not a piece of cake right now, because part of this process is still manual. You need to engage with Microsoft to buy those provision units, but it will certainly add benefits because it gives you reserved capacity, because right now Microsoft is going through a crunch of capacity, as you were pointing out, even though it's virtually unlimited, but everyone on the planet is trying to go and grab Azure OpenAI access, and Microsoft doesn't have enough capacity. So what they are doing is they have started assigning quotas for pay-as-you-go, and anyone who needs reservation, they are planning to move everyone to provision. So check it out. If you are using it in enterprise environment, it will be pretty handy.
Hi everyone.
I had a demo from YouTube which I will share, but this is for everyone who is planning to learn about Azure OpenAI. This is kind of a learning guide, a step-by-step process you can follow, starting from very scratch as creating your Azure OpenAI instance. And one thing to note is, I built this slide before Microsoft build. So I think they have removed that very thing where you see the star mark, where you have to apply for access for Azure OpenAI Service. Before build, it was not available for all the customers. It was, you have to request for access to it. Once Microsoft approves, it will show up in your tenant. But now I think at build they announced that it's available for everyone, so you might not have to do it. But more or less, you should be able to follow these step by step to learn from scratch and become comfortable with it. And I've also tried to link to some of the examples here that you can follow to learn about Azure OpenAI. If you have planned to prepare for certifications as well, so learning about Azure OpenAI will help you in earning some of these certifications, starting from AI fundamentals to AI engineers, and if anyone is interested in data science field, then the data scientist certification also covers that. That's about me. I work at Charles Schwab. I used to work with Brian and Matt Reed back at Kivet, and after that I moved on to work at Charles Schwab. I worked off 108 and Dodge. You've seen the big green building. It used to be TDA, but it was acquired by Schwab back in 2019, and we just finished the integration of it. You might have seen the media reports. That's about my workplace. I'm a Microsoft MVP since 2020. I do run Azure User Group. I was very impressed with the around here. So if you're kind enough and interested in learning more about Azure, please feel free to join us. We meet every third Wednesday of the month, and we have topics on Azure Azure related things. And I take inspiration from Matt and Brian, and we follow similar structure where we have food and drinks, we have meetings at 6 o'clock, so if you're interested, please come join. If you would like to connect with me, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and Twitter. Reach out to me if you need anything. That's pretty much all I had. If there is any Q&A, we can do it now. Otherwise, I think we should be good. And actually, I had a demo to show how we do it in .NET. But before, I have been struggling to run it. It used to run the last time I presented the same thing. But now I have been getting unauthorized errors since today morning. And we bring it up.
Is that the semantic kernel or just the SDK?
With the SDK, I think it's not like credentials that I was passing. So you see. So in this example, what I was trying to do was this is what I picked up the code from Microsoft. I mean, before that, I was trying to run my own code to write a program, C# program for Factorial, which was failing. It was giving me an exception here, which I don't understand why, because the same key and API endpoint used to work before, but it has stopped working. I did try regenerating keys, but it did not work. But essentially what you will see here on the top is now I'm calling Azure OpenAI. This is, as I said, you need the credentials here, which is the key. You need the API key, you need the endpoint for the OpenAI instance, and what you need is the deployment name. Those are the three things that you need from Azure OpenAI instance, and then you can build your program and run it. And this uses Azure OpenAI SDK for .NET, but you can also do the same thing with Python as well, and you can also try to use HTTP client and REST calls because it's essentially an API call. Thank you.
Any questions for Vaibhav? All right. Well, thank you.